I remember every detail of the night I found the grotto, though there are times I wish I could plunge that memory into the darkest trench of the sea. The voyage had started easily enough, a simple run along a rugged coastline rumored to harbor strange wonders. I'd read speculation in seafarers' journals about hidden caves with halls of black rock and strange echoes that never seemed to end. Most dismissed these tales as nothing but the tall fables of half-mad sailors, but I felt inexplicably drawn to see whether any truth dwelled beneath those stories, and so I chartered my small boat accordingly, braving the rolling waves and fitful winds of the open ocean, only half believing I would find something worthy of note. The trouble began when the wind shifted without warning. The sea's surface, once only gently rippled, was whipped into a frenzy of foam-laden swells. A roar of thunder reverberated along the clouds gathering overhead, blotting out the moonlight. The maps I had prepared, too few and too imprecise, gave little guidance on this sprawling stretch of jagged reefs. By the time I realized my mistake, the wind had backed me against the seawall of limestone cliffs that loomed high and pitiless, leaving no opportunity to turn back. My vessel was thrust in and out of rocky crags. At one point, a monstrous wave pitched me close to a half-concealed opening along the base of the cliff. The wind howled around me, salt stinging my eyes, and in that moment, I saw a dark maw that appeared in the rock as though the cliffs themselves had parted to swallow any passing ship. Without many options, since remaining adrift would almost certainly end in my boat smashed to bits upon the rocks, I angled my bow toward that eerie cavity. Against all good sense, I pressed forward, letting the tide drag me deeper into a darkness shaped by centuries of crashing surf and the slow gnawing of brine. Inside, I was met by a calm that seemed unnatural. One moment the storm raged all around me. The next, the shrieking wind and torturous waves vanished, replaced by a suffocating hush. It was not the gentle quiet of safety, but an oppressive stillness, as though I had stepped into a tomb. My lantern's meager flame flickered, revealing a wide cavern with rocky ledges where the tide lapped patiently. I tied off the boat to a jagged outcrop and climbed onto a shelf of dripping stone, unsure if I had found refuge or sealed my doom. There was a narrow path carved into the stone leading deeper into the rock face. It appeared to be natural at first, but as I ventured farther, I noticed the marks of tools, crude hollows and partitions that hinted at some long-lost attempt to civilize this cave. The darkness pressed in as I advanced by lantern light. The air smelt of brine, but also of something stagnant and old, like rotting seaweed that never sees the sun. Every footstep rattled on slick stone, echoing so sharply that I felt spied upon by the gloom. The path meandered through twisting corridors until I emerged into a vast chamber that thunderstruck me with its immensity. Its domed ceiling soared overhead, dripping with stalactites that glistened like dull, blackened teeth. And at the base of this cavern, a wide basin of water churned with ghostly phosphorescence, giving the appearance of pale green sparks dancing on the surface. The tide appeared to flow in from some subterranean channel, driving a gentle swirl. Across that shadowed bay, half buried in the rock walls and half afloat, lay the long-forgotten remnants of a ship. No, many ships. Rotting hulls peppered with barnacles and draped in seaweed like funeral shrouds. I marveled that the place did not reek of decay. It was damp and stale, but not pungent. It felt as though something far more chilling had taken the place of a normal scent. An aura of age and secrets best left undisturbed. I brought my lantern closer to the edge of the water and carefully stepped into a dilapidated rowboat that bobbed against the rocky ledge. Its oars remained intact, though covered in rusted rings of iron. With a cautious dip of the blade, I propelled myself across the still water. Each stroke was strangely muted, as though the water swallowed sound as hungrily as the stone swallowed light. When the little craft reached the first of those derelict vessels, I peered up at a hull so thoroughly bound in barnacles that the original wood was all but invisible. A toppled mast splintered like a broken limb, sails shredded into ribbons of cloth. Seaweed clung to the deck in fluttering lumps. Despite the gloom, I could see glimpses of movement on that skeletal deck. I thought it might be dripping water, slithering with the tide's currents. Still, I brought my lantern high. That was when I saw the first figure. It was slumped against the ship's railing, clad in tattered trousers and a corroded belt, skin stretched tight over a frame that had clearly not known life in many years. Fragments of barnacles encrusted its limbs, craggy lumps rising from flesh in a grotesque union of man and ocean's leavings. A glint of hollow eyes shone behind stringy hair still plastered to the skull. I should have fled at the sight, but fascination gripped my senses. Could this be a corpse from centuries past, left unburied in the hidden depths of the grotto? Yet, as I watched, its head tilted ever so slightly, as though possessed of some meager awareness. My heart pounded, but I couldn't break away from the sight. The whitened lips moved, parting with a wet sound to reveal blackened teeth. Then, before I could form a coherent thought, the figure stirred slowly, with a careful slowness that made my skin crawl. It pressed one bony hand to the deck, pushing itself upright. The horrifying knowledge that this was no lifeless shell made me scramble for the oars, but the boat rocked under me, and I nearly toppled into the grotto's dark waters. It was not alone. From the recesses of that vessel, a second figure surfaced, clinging to a shattered beam. This one still wore tatters of a mariner's coat. An iron hook replaced one hand, and when the figure turned, I realized the face was all but gone, eaten away by the sea and time, leaving only patches of leathery skin across the skull. This monstrosity emerged further into the lantern's radius, making a faint, rasping sound. In the hush of the cenote-like chamber, that breeze of a breath or moan thundered in my ears. I knew then, these were the souls, the cursed remnants of shipwrecked sailors, continuing a haunted semblance of life in a place untouched by normal tides. I wanted to row away as fast as my arms could manage, but a gruesome curiosity rooted me there. Something in these half-living shapes felt not entirely malicious, more like they were consumed by an unending duty. A command was etched deep into them, to keep sailing, no matter what condition their bodies were in. It was a tradition or a doom that bound them to rotted planks and barnacle-racked timbers, sentencing them to pilot these forsaken vessels for all eternity. A rummaging noise made me turn. The water parted near a second, smaller ship, listing near the far wall, and I saw another crew of skeletal wraiths, one wearing the remains of a captain's hat. The brim had dissolved in places where barnacles broke through, yet he stood at the helm, spine crooked as if weighed down by years of burden. One of his arms, gleaming with patches of seashells, hung stiff at his side. Even so, he guided his wreck with the ghost of authority, as though the ship might still navigate waves that had long ceased to flow across its deck. My small craft drifted against that larger hull, bumping softly. The contact seemed to rouse the undead crew into a slow, methodical action. They shuffled, ropes squeaking. They hoisted a tattered sail, impossible as it seemed, and the remnant of cloth caught only the stale air in the cavern. I felt I was intruding on their realm of perpetual voyage, an endless circular traveling within the confines of the grotto's watery womb. Suddenly my lantern dimmed. A swirl of windless cold pressed against my cheeks, stiffening the hair on the back of my neck. I looked around and saw drifting above the black water's surface a spectral glow that moved in perfect unison with the tide. It was shaped like the silhouette of a man. Though faint, it gleamed with that same phosphorescent sheen that danced upon the water. As I stared at it, my mind flickered with images of sailors lost to these depths, men who had drowned, only to find themselves resurrected in a kind of oceanic purgatory. The vision evaporated the moment I tried to look more closely, transforming into this swirl of luminescent algae. One moment it seemed so real I could see the shadow of a face. The next it was gone. I rowed deeper across the flooded cavern, navigating through a graveyard of disintegrating ships. Each one bore some dreaded occupant or multiple figures, each locked into movements reminiscent of living tasks, coiling rope, leaning at the helm, patching a non-existent sail. These were the roles of their past existence, but now twisted into an endless loop. The water seemed thick with the sorrow of centuries. The only sound was a slow drip from the stalactites above, tapping onto the rotten wood with an echo that threatened to drive me mad. Near the back of the chamber, the water seemed to slope down, revealing a partial beach of glistening pebbles. I disembarked, careful not to let my boat drift away. There, rising from the darkness, was an archway of slick stone etched with runes I could not decipher. An uneasy feeling rooted itself in my gut, warning me to turn back, but in that moment, I felt compelled to learn the grotto's secret, so I pushed onward. Beyond the archway was a corridor lined with pillars bearing maritime motifs, ornately carved whales, sea serpents, compasses, and anchors. Though time had eroded many details, it was clear this corridor had been shaped by design, and not by nature alone. The caked remains of tallow candles and algae blooms made me suspect that the sailors who stumbled upon this place performed rituals or prayers of some sort, seeking to appease whatever force held them captive. Further in, I discovered a circular chamber lit by an otherworldly glow from a hole in the cavern's ceiling, a natural skylight partially blocked by stones, forming a pale, sickly beam. At the center of the floor lay a raised slab of stone, ringed by runic carvings like the ones on the archway. Approaching, I noticed the battered remains of a figure in battered leathers. Half submerged in a shallow pool of oily water, this body was motionless, but I sensed it had not been there too long, unlike the monstrous sailors in the ships behind me. A small logbook peeked from a satchel that was still strapped diagonally across the remains. Tentatively, I knelt and carefully eased the satchel open, retrieving the log. Dark stains mottled the pages, but the ink was surprisingly legible in places. Flickering my lantern light across the brittle parchment, I read, Day 12. Found no sign of rescue. Food nearly gone. The deeper we go, the more we sense a presence slumbering in these depths. The crew, they are enthralled. Some say we must join the vessels, live forever in the husk of a ship. I see them changing. Barnacles are taking root. My mind reeled. These words seemed no older than a few decades at most. The pages that followed were smeared, but I made out a final scrawl near the end. The sea will not let them die. The captain begs me to perform the rite, but to do so we must relinquish our mortal forms. I fear it is too late. Then the ink bled into the page, making the rest impossible to read. I looked up, heart pounding. Somewhere in the recesses of the cave, I heard a rhythmic knocking of wood on wood, as though a mast or yardarm was being beaten methodically. My thoughts darted to the possibility that more of those decaying sailors lurked behind me, half limping across the stony floor in search of new recruits. Quickly, I stuffed the logbook into my oilskin pouch. The shapes etched into the slab at the center of the chamber seemed to loom at me, coaxing me to attempt something best left undone. I recoiled from the suggestion that flitted through my mind, some ritual or sacrifice that would allow me to live forever, as they did. Yet it stirred a maddening temptation. If these were indeed the spirits of men lost to the sea, forced to sail until the end of time, what power had shaped that fate, and why were they not simply dead, claimed by the deep as so many others? The knowledge weighed me down like a cold chain. There was no glory to be found in their existence, no comfort in immortality, only endless wandering in a dark tomb, enslaved to the motions of a forlorn voyage. When I returned to the boat, I found a single pale figure drifting near it, motionless except for the slow sway of the water. Gripping my lantern, I edged closer. The figure wore the rotted rags of a ship's cook. A heavy apron fused to what remained of his torso. Barnacles ringed his neck like a dreadful collar. He turned to me with a low groan, revealing eye sockets that were mostly empty. yet somehow brimming with a spectral glow. As I stepped down into my boat, he reached out, placing one slimy hand on the rim, as though begging me not to leave. I froze. The hush of that chamber felt as thick as molasses. Slowly, I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes for reasons I couldn't entirely explain. Here was a man who had at some point yearned for rescue, for comfort, or for a single morsel off his cooking tray that might bring him a taste of normal life. Instead, he'd become trapped in unbroken torment. A part of me wanted to help him, to say comforting words, but what solace could I offer? I was a trespasser in their eternal realm. I lowered my head and quietly eased the oar between us, sliding him off the bow so I could leave this place while I still had my wits about me. Pushing away, I could almost feel the despair of that composite crew watching my every move as I navigated around the wrecks. I skirted the battered hulls, passing close to that silent captain at the helm. He turned his head as I passed, the bones of his neck creaking. A faint rasp, perhaps a greeting or a warning, escaped his lipless mouth, but I forced myself to row onward. The ceiling soared above me, unyielding, scattering a faint echo of my labored breaths. I thought once more of the stabbing storms outside, and I wondered if it would be any safer out there than among these cursed men. When I at last reached the passage that led me back to my own boat, I found the path blocked by a cluster of broken timbers. Somehow, the ruined flotsam had drifted into the entranceway. Fear seized me at the notion that even the tides themselves might be conspiring to keep me here. But with a surge of determination, I thrust my oars into the water, nudging aside loose debris. Again, I saw that phosphorescent glow swirl under my hull, shaping into vague outlines of arms and faces. I clenched my eyes shut for a moment, focusing on my immediate task of clearing a route. Past the debris, the corridor opened back into the mouth of the cave. My own small sailboat waited, bobbing gently at its mooring, as though in a state of uneasy slumber. The storm was still raging beyond the stone walls. Lightning lit occasional flashes of the entrance. Swallowing a deep breath, I climbed aboard and tested the lines securing my craft. With trembling hands, I raised the meager sail, clenched the rudder, and steeled myself for the violent surge of water that would greet me once I passed beyond the grotto's threshold. Yet as I prepared to exit, something made me look back. In that moment, the swirl of sea and darkness parted just enough for me to see a faint gathering of undead silhouettes at the edge of the black water. They stood in a quiet throng, their barnacle-crusted limbs like coral branches. Seaweed dangled from them like tattered banners. They did not chase me, nor did they beckon me closer. They simply watched, with hollow eyes that held an unending loneliness, as if they knew I would never truly be free of their presence. Once you have glimpsed them, you carry their memory like a salt-laden anchor on your soul. The wind howled, dragging me out into the storm's raging fury. Waves battered my small craft. Rain assaulted me in sheets. I wrestled the mainsail, fighting to keep the little boat from capsizing as lightning snapped across the sky. The swirling water thrust me against the outcrop of rock, and for a moment I believed I would be dashed to pieces. But some final shift of current guided my vessel around the sharp edges, and with a nerve-wracking scream of the wind, I was spat out into the churning ocean. The flickering light of that hidden grotto behind me. By dawn, the storm had spent its rage, leaving me afloat on a calmer sea beneath a red-streaked sky. My limbs trembled from exhaustion, chilled to the bone. I clung to the tiller, scarcely believing I had survived. The edge of the coast was visible in the distance, weather-beaten and pocked by caves that I could not distinguish, save for one which might have been my grim misfortune to discover. As soon as I was able, I navigated back to safer waters, and eventually reached a harbor, where I collapsed on the docks, with no coherent explanation of the nightmares I had witnessed. In the days that followed, I tried to share my story with a few souls who might believe such an account, but each time, my words sparked only incredulity, or worse, dark interest, from those who wished to find the place for themselves, as though it were some treasure-laden site. I have since learned to keep my recollection hidden, to speak of it only in shadows for fear that more would seek to uncover that cursed grotto and join those doomed mariners in their state of living death. Sometimes, late at night when a storm shakes the rafters, I dream of that captain in his barnacle-strewn hat, commanding a deck of sailors whose eyes gleam with a sorrow deeper than any sea trench. I dream of them raising their shredded sails to an absent wind, guided only by the disembodied hush that pulses through flooded caverns. And in those dreams, I sense their gaze turned upon me, even across distance and time, as though still inviting, no, demanding, that I join the armada of shipwrecked souls. The memory floods me with cold sweat, and I sit upright in bed, half certain that I can feel the creeping wetness of barnacles on my own skin. But I have not returned. My presence in that place was an accident, one I have no intention of repeating. Let the grotto remain hidden behind crashing waves and swirling tempests, sealed by the illusions of myth. Let those who go searching for it hear only the cackle of gulls, and dismiss the rumors as sea-logged fantasies, for the truth is far more horrifying than any yarn we can spin in a tavern. It is not gold or pearls that lie in that drowned realm, but the endless echo of ships' bells, the scraping of rotting hulls, and the lifeless silhouettes pushing onward, a never-ending voyage in the gloom, cursed by the sea's unyielding might. If you ever find yourself at the base of jagged cliffs during a raging storm, and if you sense a low vacancy in the wind's howl, as though something in the rocks beckons you closer, turn away. Run if you can. This is not a hidden haven from the tempest. It is a doorway to a living tomb, where corroded bodies remain strapped to their helms and decks, forced to sail for all eternity in waters that will not release their souls. Such a life and death is a horror that no mortal can truly fathom until it is too late. If chance or tragedy should ever cast you into that grotto's embrace, know that the silhouettes you see watching from the decks are not truly waiting for you. They are waiting for the next wave, the next storm, the next lost sailor fleeing the fury of the sea. And once you've witnessed them, you may find the sea is never as benign as you imagined. Its depths have tasted you, recognized you, and somewhere in that secret cave, a half-rotten hand might already be reaching out, beckoning you back into the watery dark, where the living bow to the dead, and the dead never cease their voyage.